Alrighty, welcome to the first in a series of videos I'm doing on my camera equipment and how I use that camera equipment to capture the mountain bike footage that I'm bringing to you all. Before we dive in, I have a tiny favor to ask. Could you please hit that big old red subscribe button below the video so you can keep up with my tales from the trails. Long and Winding is all about sharing stories from the amazing trails I've been riding here in Australia, and your support is much appreciated. Today I'm going to be talking about the awesome gimbal, the Ronin SC by DJI. So this video will be super useful for any photographers who want to capture action sports, outdoors especially, and for any mountain bikers who kind of want to lift their game in terms of their production values and cinematography. So I'm just going to quickly touch on what a gimbal actually is for anyone who's unsure. Basically, a gimbal smoothens your footage out. So rather than the jerky footage you might see if you pan your SLR or mirrorless camera around in video, or the kind of footage you might get if you strapped a GoPro Hero 4 to your chest, you're going to get really jerky, unstable footage that is pretty much unwatchable. So gimbal smoothens everything out and makes everything kind of watchable and smooth. From what I've seen, I still don't think the GoPro Hero 7s or 8s stack up to an actual gimbal when it comes to capturing point of view footage. And the same goes for handheld cameras like mirrorless cameras or digital SLRs. They really do need the physical gimbal to help stabilize the footage. I know with my A7 Mark III, the inbuilt stabilization just does not cut it. Especially when you're running around or you're moving around a lot, it's just unwatchable. So a gimbal was really something that was pretty high on my shopping list. So the Ronin SC is a lightweight version of its older and bigger brother, the Ronin S. It also includes a really awesome app that includes heaps of features to tune the gimbal, and I'll go into those in a second to show you my settings. It also includes stuff like Active Track, which I'm not going to go into in this video. There are a bunch of videos on that on the internet, so go check that out. I'm more focused on how I'm using this gimbal for capturing mountain bike footage. I really wanted to get those smooth tracking shots where I'm running behind someone, or I'm panning through a scene, or I'm even just walking around and the camera is not jerking all over the shot. So I'm just going to talk quickly about how I set this gimbal up and show you some of my settings and tips on balancing this thing for mountain biking. And then I'm going to show you the results. So what I was able to actually achieve with this gimbal, and a little bit of an indication about how suitable this thing is for mountain biking. So one of the biggest things about setting up a gimbal is balancing it, and this is something that sends a shiver down any photographer's spine when they hear about balancing a gimbal. But thankfully with the Ronin S, it's actually pretty easy. So you can lock the motors and balance one at a time. You can also follow the awesome YouTube tutorial that DJI has posted that talks you through every step of balancing the gimbal. It also includes camera specific points. So for me, it was the A7 Mark III. There was a few tips for me on that. So with the balancing, I'd really recommend putting an hour or two aside of your day, sitting down in your lounge room and balancing this thing properly, because once it's balanced and set up properly from the start, it's going to be a whole lot easier down the road. I also made a note of all these settings and positions of the arms and the gimbal, so if anything gets knocked during transport, I can easily refer back to my notes and rebalance the gimbal quickly. The next thing to do for setup is to get the stiffness of your motors correct. So getting the stiffness of the motors correct is really crucial if we want smooth shots while we're running or walking even. So here are my settings for my motor stiffnesses. So these were the best settings that I found for my A7 Mark III after quite a lot of time fiddling around and experimenting. A good rule of thumb here that I've read about to do is to wind the motors up until the gimbal is vibrating, and then just notch it back a few points from there, maybe up to 5, and that will give you the right amount of stiffness for your motors. So they're as stiff as possible without vibrating the gimbal. So then I was running a few tests in my backyard, running around like an idiot, and I can show you some of those. I was experimenting with different grip holes on the gimbal, and I found that you really do need to screw the tripod extender connector thing into the bottom of the gimbal, and this is a two-handed job. There's no like one-handed action shot running around like a cowboy. That's not happening. It's two hands on the gimbal, folks. Like, this thing is heavy, and you need two hands. You just need two hands. Also, removing the base plate from the camera is a bit of a pain in the butt, in that when you go to put it back on, you need to find the correct settings so your gimbal is balanced correctly. So swapping between tripods and the gimbal is a bit of a pain in the butt. So I actually keep the base plate of my gimbal connected to my camera all the time. If someone knows a better way of doing this, please let me know in the comments. I would love to know. And then the last bit of setup I did was to set my user modes. See, these are found in user profile in the DJI app, and I'll show you my settings for those now. But basically, the first one is set up for running around and chasing mountain bikers around the place. The second one is a more chill mode, and there's a bit more flexibility in the panning of it. And the third setting is set up for 360-degree roll, because that is cool. So these are then activated via the M button on the gimbal itself. So when you're out in the field, you can just quickly switch between the different modes. And you've got that flexibility. You don't have to pull the app out and play around with settings, because that's just a bit of a vibe killer. All right, now it is time for the results. It's the juicy part of the Prezzo. It's the final slide deck. It's the stuff we all want to know. How well does this thing perform in the field? So for panning this thing around and walking slowly, this gimbal is really amazing for stabilizing footage shot with a mirrorless camera like my A7 Mark III. But it took me much fiddling around and tweaking to get some results when running. So I found when I was running that I was getting some pretty bad jitters up and down in the camera, which, to be honest, I was a little bit disappointed about. And I was able to improve it a little bit by increasing the motor stiffness and playing around with some of the settings. So that's where the image stabilization built into my camera came in. So once I switched that on, it was a bit of a game changer. So I was finally getting those kind of smooth running effects that I was looking for. So combining the inbuilt image stabilization and the Ronin SC gave me the best results while running. Okay, so here is a shot with me running in my backyard with the camera stabilization off. And here's me running again with the camera stabilization on. So you can see that it actually makes quite a difference to your footage. As you can see, we got some really great results out at Quarry Bike Park. Although even with the image stabilization on, we still found some shots were pretty jittery when running at high speed over varying undulating terrain. I mean, which is fair enough. Here, Sam is chasing me down Quarry Park Bike Park through some pretty rough terrain at pretty decent speed. So what I found with this shot is that I could actually stabilize it pretty effectively in post. So here's the footage without the stabilization on. And here's the footage with the software stabilization on. So using Final Cut's inbuilt image stabilization, it pretty much totally smoothed out the up and down in the footage and gave this really smooth result. This didn't always work for all of the shots, but for this particular shot, it worked really well. Also, another thing to keep in mind with this gimbal is that it's potentially not that hardy. So I've given my GoPro gimbal an absolute hiding. I've crashed on it directly, I've dropped it, it's waterproof, it's actually really bomb-proof. But I don't think the Ronin SC is quite as hardy. So if you're going to be taking this thing out in the trail, I would treat it with care. For me, that was buying a proper camera bag to store it in while I rode. So to summarize, this gimbal really will transform your footage, really raising the production value and professionalism of the shots you can capture with a mirrorless or digital SLR camera. However, running with this gimbal really does push it to its limits, and I would recommend trying it out with your own camera before you buy it. If you have a heavier camera or you don't have inbuilt image stabilization, I'd be wary of buying this gimbal if you did want to track shots while you're running. That said, if you have a lighter camera like a 6 series Sony, then that's going to be lighter and probably as a result less jittery. So would I buy it again? Yes, totally would. I think it's worth the money, but you just have to be really wary of its limitations. So I really hope this video was helpful. If it was, please give me a thumbs up and hey, even a subscribe. Any questions, pop them in the comments section below, and I'll see you for my next camera video series shortly.